houses I lived in. Here, I would say to myself instead. I live here. Sometimes I had to shake myself. Real life. I'd felt detached from my body for as far back as I could remember. Felt I watched it from above. But in those places that were not my childhood home, that sense felt extreme. I spent the end of my 20s and nearly all of my 30s in a small brown ranch house that my grandparents had purchased my final year in college when they'd had to downsize. My husband and I moved into it after my grandfather passed to help care for my grandmother, and after she passed, we bought the house. It sits in the center, known as the Village, of the small, wealthy, lakeside New Hampshire town of Guilford, where my grandparents had attended church since 1940, the year they got married. Back then, Guilford was a farmer's community, and my grandparents were business owners who lived a few miles down the hill in the small mill city of Laconia. But after the war, they, like many others, moved up to the nearby country town that bordered the mountains and lake. They gave their lives to Guilford, volunteering, playing the organ for the church, organizing community plays and outings, showing up for those less fortunate, raising 4 children and them burying 1. Now, though they have been gone over a decade, their names continue to be well known in that area. I don't love that house I lived in, or that neighborhood. The house itself is somewhat shabby, and it's also surrounded by large, expensive homes with professional lawn care, and this always made me feel out of place. I don't love that town, either, though I used to, for it is idyllic. There are mountains crisscrossed with hiking trails, there's the largest lake in the state, and there's a ski area. The library is well-funded, and so is the school. So well-funded, in fact, that there's even a sap house so children can tap the maple trees and learn to make syrup in March. On Halloween, the village street where I lived is closed off, and the scene of families walking up and down the block at the base of the mountains beneath the red maples is picture perfect, out of a children's book. Same at Christmas time, when the street is shut down again for a candlelight stroll of caroling, warm treats in neighbors' yards, and open tours of the village's oldest buildings. Though I went back and forth between parents, my primary childhood home was my mother's old farmhouse in a poor mill town some 10 miles to the west. Growing up, we would play against this wealthy lake and mountain town in school sports, always painfully aware of what they had and we lacked. Good uniforms, school ski teams, photography and creative writing classes, an auditorium so school plays could be performed on a real stage instead of in the cafeteria. So, even though Guilford was where my father had come from and where my grandparents had lived, when I moved there as an adult, it felt like an acute betrayal. I had a wonderful childhood in that town, my father tells me. He tells me stories about trick-or-treating on my street, which was closed off back then in just the same way. He tells me about the family who managed to raise 5 children in my very small Guilford house when he was a boy. When he hears what my daughter had to endure in that town, he says, "I just can't imagine it. Elementary school should be a time of pure happiness." Does he have amnesia? Is it possible that he has entirely forgotten the landscape of my own childhood? Chapter 2. I was born in Laconia, that small mill city my grandparents first lived in together. Today, it has all the markings of an East Coast city plagued by the opioid crisis. Empty mills, boarded-up storefronts, pharmacies on what feels like every corner. But of course it wasn't always like that. My paternal grandfather grew up in that city during its heyday, when it had working mills, trolley cars, a train to Boston, and thriving businesses. One was my family.